Salams from the People's Dispatch studios here in New Delhi. You're watching the Daily Debrief with me, Siddhant Ani, and we have a packed Monday episode kicking off the week to get through. So we'll get straight into it. First up, Saudi Arabia and Syria are in talks to reopen formal diplomatic ties, including a Saudi embassy in the war-torn country for the first time in a decade. The reports were corroborated by Saudi state television and indicate the latest in a region that is in the process of a reshuffle of both relationships as well as strategic and economic objectives. The announcement comes after the Chinese-mediated talks in Beijing, where Saudi Arabia and Iran agreed to reopen embassies in each other's nations after years of tension. Dr. Abdul Rahman is with us and he's been waiting patiently for us to get underway with this show. But he's here to talk about the latest developments here and elsewhere. Abdul, first up, run us through how the talks have worked and what has been the mediation process and all of these things that has led us up to this point.
Well, there are many unconfirmed reports about how Russia has played a significant role in bringing Syria and Saudi Arabia together, how the Chinese rapprochement, that mediation basically in rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia had played a kind of role in softening the stances of both the countries vis-a-vis each other.
Right.
So all those things are there, of course. Also, the earthquake which happened in Syria in February, has basically opened possibility of various regional countries to engage with Syria. So in the background of all these various developments, last month both the countries agreed to reopen the embassies in each other capitals, which was shut down in 2012. Also, now there is a report, as you rightly pointed out, that both the countries have basically, there is an attempt by Saudi Arabia to bring Syria back into the Arab League grouping. It is a fact that in 2011, within few months after the war started in Syria, Arab League sat and voted to suspend Syria's membership in the grouping. Since then, Syria has been basically isolated from the larger regional politics, and now it seems that there is a diplomatic movements at different fronts, which basically indicates that Syria, that isolation, the phase of isolation has ended. And one should understand, as I said before, there are larger contexts unfolding, how China and Russia are basically proactively participating in it, and how Saudi Arabia is basically has kind of come to the point where it seems it is inevitable to basically start the diplomatic relations with Syria. The summit, the Arab League summit, which is going to happen in Riyadh on May 19th, is a crucial forum. And if Syria is formally invited, there is a move, of course, we don't know whether last year also there was Algerian president tried to kind of bring Syria into the summit which happens in the Algerian capital. It did not materialize for the various reasons, primarily because the majority of the Arab League countries did not agree with it. We do not know the same thing will happen or not this time, but at least there is a decisive push to bring Syria into the larger Arab regional politics.
Which brings us nicely to the next part of the conversation, Abdul, which is the overall sort of schematic of the Middle East and North Africa region and the shifts that we are seeing over the past few months. Particularly, it's been accelerated, as you were mentioning, with Saudi Arabia, Iran, and of course the Chinese playing a role there. Exactly. So in that sense, what are the indications that you are reading from it in terms of how the region will be able to kind of look at various superpowers and their relationships and what it brings in return, economically as well as politically, to MENA?
Well, as I said before, because Syria has been in isolation all these years, particularly because, of course, the disagreements not only about larger Syrian government's stance vis-a-vis the opposition forces, the question of democracy, which was ironical, of course. Most of these Arab countries are not democratic in the sense the larger movement from which this war started in 2011. But still, that was one of the reasons quoted by the different governments at the time when they broke the diplomatic relationship with the Syrian Bashar al-Assad government. Now it seems that given the larger geopolitical realignment which is happening, unfolding, particularly because of the coming of Chinese and Russians proactively participating in the regional politics, there is an attempt to understand the hegemonic US policies which had been deciding the fate of the shaping the regional politics for a very long time. Yeah. It seems that there is a greater realization among the Arab countries now that the US role has been mostly destructive, destabilizing for the reason, and there is a time to kind of get rid of that particular country's orientations and shift towards a more stable, more cooperation-based relationship. And in this, the rapprochement between China and Saudi Arabia had played a very crucial role, particularly because it was Iranian role in Syria or in Yemen or in Lebanon, which basically was stimulating a kind of apprehensions in Saudi Arabia's and other Arab countries' minds. They were not sure about the motives of Iranians in this region. Now that there is an attempt to have a dialogue between Iran and Saudi Arabia, of course the apprehensions will automatically reduce because there is an open dialogue between both the countries. And as the apprehensions about Iranian motives in the region decreases, and the understanding of the destructive role of the US in the region becomes obvious, of course, there is going to be more and more collaboration and cooperation among all the countries in the region, which initially, of course, if you see the history of the Arab world, there was a movement once upon a time of creating an Arab nation, United Arab Nation. Of course, that is not possible at this moment, but at least there can be a greater cooperation among all the Arab countries, and that is the only fate the Arab countries deserve.
And at least in the short run, hopefully we can see lessening of the kind of humanitarian crisis that we are also seeing as a result.
This will lead to, of course, the reduction of the conflicts, at least the intensity of the conflicts that will provide immediate relief, which is needed, both in Yemen, in Syria, in other parts of the larger Arab world.
All right, we're talking about Finland next, Abdul, so we'll get your take on the elections there as well, where conservative leader Petteri Orpo has won a nail-biting three-way race, defeating incumbent Prime Minister Sanna Marin's centre-left. The Conservative National Coalition Party, which is led by Orpo, took 20.8% of the vote and bagged 48 seats. That's up from 37 back in 2019. This result rendered it the single largest party in the Finnish parliament. The far-right populist Finns party registered their best performance ever in an election with 21.1% of the vote and a record 46 seats. Meanwhile, Marin's Social Democrats came in third in an election that reminded at least me of a 100-meter sprint with 19.8% of the vote share and 43 seats. Abdul, an extremely tight finish, and despite Marin having sort of led Finland through a difficult period, COVID-19, the situation with regard to Russia and Ukraine, the voters seem to be heading in a different direction. How do you see the latest election result?
Well, it seems that it is more of the personal, you can say, the campaign, which was one of the reasons of Marin's losing 1% and 1.5% of the votes. Basically, when last year the video surfaced about her drinking and partying amidst the larger suffering of the masses, quote-unquote suffering, we are talking about Finland. The larger Finland, the Finnish population also has basically suffered for other developments in the region. The energy prices, of course, have created a cost of quote-unquote living crisis, which is unfolding in different parts of Europe in different ways.
Yeah.
And that has also created a kind of anti-incumbency. Which became the added into the anti-incumbency, of course. So if you see the economic, what is generally emerging from this result is the economic dissatisfaction, despite the fact, as you rightly pointed out, that she was the prime minister, she was leading the country at a very crucial and difficult phase of the country's history when COVID was unfolding. There is war in Ukraine, then there is energy crisis and all those things, of course. But despite the fact that common people were not happy with the results of all these things, they had to ultimately suffer. The prices of essential commodities were going up, and the policies were in no way helping them. And that basically resulted in slight shift of the vote towards the more right-wing. Of course, this is a centrist party, but more right-wing parties, which basically promised much more nationalist orientation of policies, which common people think that will get them out from their economic problems.
Of course, it's an interesting scenario now looking at whether the single largest party headed by Orpo will form a coalition with those considered on the left of the spectrum or those on the far right. And if any indication is to be gathered from it, especially the populism of it, we really can't say at this point how that might go. But there were also reports that before the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, only about or less than a third of Finland's population was keen on joining NATO and such things. So there has been a quite drastic shift to the right. Does the right provide any solution to the kind of issues, debt-related issues and other issues that the Finnish people, given that this is, like you were pointing out, this is one of the nations that, at least by economic and social indicators, is performing the best in the world. Are there any solutions on the card from the new alternative?
It is difficult to say. At the right wing, no party, I think, has a solution to it. The left is, of course, marginal force, so they are in no way that can be the only solution visible. But if you see all the right wing parties, they've won the election raising the issue of national debt and talking about the mismanagement of the larger economic issues. But when they are in power, they are in no position to address these issues. Primarily because their orientation is not much different from what Social Democrats had done. That is one. The second thing is, given the fact that the European Union at large has decided to boycott the Russians at this moment, and Finland in this context has even gone further, discarding its neutrality and joining the NATO forces, there is a larger consensus among all the main parties in Finland about it joining NATO. Whether this will have this will get any benefit, will bring any benefit to the larger masses in Finland. Of course, that is, I think, is already a far gone conclusion that there is no benefit for the common population.
If anything, they will perhaps be asked for material and other support for...
Because NATO is now based on increase of defense expenditure and so on and so forth. It means the Finnish population will ultimately have to pay for increased defense expenditure. One last thing which is important to highlight at this moment, that Finland joining NATO will also have a larger repercussion of, not only because it is closer to Russia and so on and so forth, because the right-wing parties, both the right-wing parties which have got almost together 100 seats, they have a policy of anti-immigration as well. So how it will unfold and have an effect on the future government policies in Finland, it is to be seen. It is not that the current government was any better, but whether it will go to further extremes when it comes to immigrants, or it will have some other softening impact, primarily because of the war in Russia, war in Ukraine, and Finland joining NATO.
All right. Thanks very much, Abdul, for your time today. And we're moving on with that to our final story of the day. Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim on Monday said that he is prepared in what might end up being a significant move to negotiate with China over a maritime dispute between the two countries. This comes days after there were reports of Chinese patrols close to a Malaysian offshore gas pipeline. China has claimed sovereignty over almost the entire South China Sea area, through which about $3 trillion worth of annual trade, shipping goes through. Malaysia, Brunei, Philippines, Taiwan and Vietnam are some of the other countries that have some overlapping claims on which now a discussion is ongoing, as it has been for some time. Anish covers the region for People's Dispatch and joins us via video conference for the latest update. Anish, good to have you with us on Daily Debrief as always. Give us first some context into this statement by the Malaysian Prime Minister.
Well, the immediate context is specifically the fact that they want to start serious exploring for oil and natural gas in the Spratly Islands region that they have claimed for themselves as well, in dispute with China. Now, the thing is that historically, Malaysia has never been very aggressive in its assertion on these territorial rights. Obviously, it has always been a long-standing dispute, and with the Cold War era history and the baggage that it had. There was always issues in the region, and like that was always this thorn between relations between China and Malaysia. But it never really went in a very aggressive mode. So recently, we've seen Malaysia taking special umbrage over Chinese military's presence in the region, or in the region that is closer to its continental shelf even. And that has created some frostiness in their relations, and that has affected the manner in which things moved on the dispute as well. So this recent statement by Ibrahim is quite significant in that it is an attempt, an open invite of sorts to the Chinese, saying that we are ready to negotiate because we need this oil and natural gas, the resources that are available in the region. So we are ready to negotiate with China and come up with a workable solution, even if the dispute itself is not resolved. And so this is something that it has done with some of its neighbors as well. With Thailand, there is a special economic zone that it runs for oil exploration. The same happens with Vietnam and Brunei. So in all of these cases, it has always had this very cooperative relationship with its neighbors, and it is, it won't be far off the mark to assume that it will be approaching its relations with China in the same vein. So there can be some sort of workable solution, something similar to a joint exploratory mission that has happened with China, with several of the countries that it is holding this dispute with in the South China Sea, including the Philippines recently, which failed for different reasons. But nevertheless, these were very serious attempts, and something of that sort we can expect maybe perhaps in the short run in the next couple of years with Malaysia as well.
I don't know how you look at it, Anish, but a little bit of non-aggressive sort of frostiness also opens the door towards, some kind of conversation and perhaps a more long-term resolution to these conflicts. In that context, and like we were talking earlier in the show about the MENA region, these kind of regional groupings hold significant value. How do we see these developments, Anish, at present? Should we look at it strictly in bilateral terms between Malaysia and China, or is there potential here for a wider sort of multilateral conversation to continue?
Well, in the case of Malaysia, the history of Malaysia-China relations have been ever since it started recognizing the People's Republic of China, it has always tried to maintain a very cordial relation. At least since the 90s, we've seen extremely friendly relations, partly because of the Chinese diaspora in Malaysia, but also because of several, doorways and cultural exchanges that have happened between the two countries, and also in terms of trade and commerce. But all of these factors have always kept territorial disputes at bay, and we have seen, be it previously under Mahathir or successive other governments that have come to power recently, there has always been this attempt to not go for a very, on your face, uh, acrimonious relations with China. Even even at times calling out the US's and Japan's provocations in the region, in the South China Sea, and saying at one point there was even foreign minister's statement that said that your enemies does not mean that they are our enemies. So these kind of statements have happened, and so that history has always been there. So Malaysia is not the one to necessarily go for any kind of a problematic relation with its neighbor, but we are also seeing this sort of general regional development on one side, where there are governments that have not been beholden to a certain kind of new Cold War aggression in the region. We are seeing attempts to resolve, if not entirely resolve the dispute, but come up with workable ways whereby you can create, you can have disputes being resolved in its own way, territorial disputes being resolved in its own way, but keep the trade and keep diplomacy and keep relations going. And we are seeing that with Vietnam recently, seeing that in some ways also within the internal, we've talked about this very recently, about how the internal political dynamics within Taiwan is affecting and creating two different parallels of how to approach China. So all of these factors are definitely showing that there are voices within the region, and obviously Indonesia we've talked about very recently. So all of these factors show that there are tendencies, great deal of tendencies in the region, where leaders are realizing or completely realize the fact that demonizing or isolating China is not an option for them, and they cannot be dragged into this sort of US-China trade wars or disputes, that whatever happens in that. So they really need to have workable solutions for themselves, so they do not be at the worst end of the stick in the long run.
Yeah, or caught in the middle.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. We leave it there, Anish. Good to have you with us. Right, that brings to an end this Monday episode of the Daily Debrief. From Anish, myself, and the entire team here at People's Dispatch, thank you very much for watching. As always, we invite you to head to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, for details on these stories and all of the other work we do. Don't also forget to give us a follow on the social media platform of your choice. We'll be back again, same time, same place tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.